In the midst of our world lives a group of people whom nature and society itself have placed apart. Those we call cripples. Many of them are cared for through public and private charity. Others are the ones who, beyond physical suffering, carry also the hidden scars of the mind. Major James Fowkes is the father of a child with spina bifida. Since 1971, he's been employed as bursar to a trust set up for the care of epileptics. It is in that capacity that he faces trial today at Fulchester Crown Court, accused of stealing funds which the trust placed in his charge.
My wife and I have a son that's suffering from epilepsy. Most children like that can go to normal schools, but not ours. Simon suffers from what is known as a personality disorder. After a fit, he becomes abnormal, violent. There are only one or two special schools for children like that. And so in 1970, several parents like ourselves got together. We bought a big house outside the town called Knowles. We hadn't much money, but we gave what we could. I put in 1,000 myself. We raised the rest of the money by raffles, jumble sales, appeals, anything. The place is a success now.
Do you recall anything that happened on March the 15th, 1973?
I do, very clearly.
Would you tell us in your own words?
Well, it's quite simple. We had a meeting of the trustees, and during it, Sir Richard informed us that we had a favourable balance of over £25,000. We voted to invest £15,000 of it in some steady shares like ICI, with Sir Richard to take the necessary steps. That was typical of him.
Just what was decided, Mr. Bateman?
Don't interrupt your witness, Miss Lewis. You invited him to use his own words.
I am sorry, my lord.
Now, go on, Mr. Bateman.
Well, I just wanted to say that that was typical of Creswell's style. He always had to have a hold of the financial reins.
What occurred subsequently?
Well, Sir Richard told us that he'd given the details to Major Fowkes because he was going on a holiday. And then after 5 weeks' time, he came back and broke the news to us.
What news?
He told us that Major Fowkes had confessed that he'd invested the...
Mr. Bateman, what Sir Richard said that the defendant told him is hearsay and cannot be heard.
A fact's a fact.
Nevertheless, it is inadmissible. Now, members of the jury, will you kindly disregard the previous remark? Miss Lewis?
Did Sir Richard give you any news concerning the state of your investment?
He did. He said that he had good reasons to believe that Major Fowkes had invested only £1,500 in the ICI shares, and the remainder he'd put into some speculation called Metalia. What was as plain as daylight was that these Metalia shares had gone bust. They'd sunk out of sight.
How much money had been lost?
£18,500.
£18,500. How was that possible?
Well, Sir Richard said that he also had good reasons to believe that Major Fowkes had convinced Lady Creswell that she should sign a cheque for £20,000 instead of £15,000.
What was your reaction to this news?
Well, we were all shattered. I mean, we'd sacrificed so much, we didn't intend to have it invested in some speculative shares. My wife and I, we'd scraped together every penny we could. Since Simon's epilepsy had been diagnosed, he was 3 then, we just couldn't believe it.
What was Sir Richard's reaction to the news?
Oh, he seemed overwhelmed, yes. He kept saying that he couldn't understand how Major Fowkes could do it to us, or to him especially.
Did you yourself have occasion to meet Major Fowkes during this period?
Oh, yes, 2 or 3 times a week after school, same as usual.
Did he behave in any way unusually?
I'd say so, yes. He seemed very depressed, as if he'd something on his mind, and he looked tense and acted so.
Did he say anything in particular which stays in your mind?
Yes. One night, after I'd come back, he'd been working late, and the both of us went for a drink. He didn't drink much, and neither did I. But that night, he had 2 or 3 large whiskies, and it seemed to open him up a bit. That in itself was unusual. He never told no one his business.
Go on.
Well, as I say, the whiskey seemed to make him more and more irritable. And we were discussing the trust, and I said how happy I was in what we'd achieved. And suddenly he lost his temper. And he said that, he just shouted it at me. He said that private charity could go on no longer and that it was a farce.
Was that all he said?
No. He said that the time was coming, that if wealth wasn't distributed with the agreement of the rich, then it would be done without them. He told me that the time was coming sooner than I thought.
Are you quite certain he said those words?
Positive. I mean, I'd never heard him talk like that before. It was a kind of cold sort of anger. That's the only way I can describe it. Of course, you must remember that his daughter had been refused a place at the school, and quite justifiably because she wasn't an epileptic. But I remembered it that night, I can tell you.
Thank you, Mr. Bateman.
When Major Fawkes made these remarks to you concerning the redistribution of wealth, what did you take him to mean?
Oh, I didn't take it to mean anything. That's for others to say.
Yes, but what did you say to him at the time?
Well, I said if he thought like that, he should be living in Eastern Europe.
Yes, precisely. He was making a political remark, wasn't he, and nothing else?
Well, if you say so.
Now, what do you think?
I don't. It doesn't affect me one way or t'other.
Now, judging from your evidence, Sir Richard Cresswell seems to have told you many things.
A fair number.
In fact, you and the other trustees seem to have been guided by him throughout this whole affair.
Or not by choice.
What do you mean?
Well, originally we chose him as a kind of figurehead. But with his title and his big car and his country house, he didn't help the trust. In fact, he put off a lot of the donors.
I see. Could you tell us how the financial side of things was looked after?
Looked after? That was Sir Richard's preserve. His idea was to invest all the assets of the company in the stock market. But that wasn't our idea. We wanted to use the traditional methods, fundraising and things like that. We didn't agree with speculation. All we wanted was security.
What course did Major Fawkes favour?
Fawkes, his views didn't come into it. He was Sir Richard's stooge. It didn't matter what he said, because Sir Richard just did what he thought.
Did you dislike him?
No. I felt sorry for him.
What type of investment did Sir Richard put forward to the other trustees?
Oh, many kinds.
Yes, but which were you most apprehensive about?
The ones he called growth areas.
Why?
Because the risk was too high.
In those areas, did he ever mention the name Metallia?
Not that I remember.
Then he may have done.
No, not if I don't remember it.
Very well, if that's what you believe, no further questions.
No re-examination, my lord.
Very well, Mr. Bateman, you may leave the witness box.
Thank you, my lord.
I call Henry Walbrook Ince.
Henry Walbrook Ince, please.
You are Henry Walbrook Ince of 13 Cavendish Mews, London, SW1.
Yes.
What is your profession?
I'm one of the partners of a firm of stockbrokers, Dimbleby and Ince.
If you would, I'd like you to try to cast your mind back to March the 20th, 1973.
By all means.
On that day, did you conduct a market transaction on behalf of any clients?
Rather a few, I'm afraid.
Do you see any of them in court today?
Only one.
Who is that?
The defendant.
Will you tell us the nature of the transaction?
Well, certainly. Major Fawkes came to our offices that morning to see me. He asked me to arrange 2 investments for him.
What were they?
He wished to buy £1,500 worth of ICI shares in the trust's name. That was no problem. And in his own, £18,500 worth of an Australian mining stock known as Metallia. That was a rather different proposition.
Why?
Well, there was a vague rumour going round that one of their iron options north of Perth, in the Mount Tom Price range to be exact, had come up trumps, which, if it had been true, would have meant something really big. Unfortunately, it wasn't. Of course, I warned Fawkes of the danger involved, the fact that Metallia had very nearly gone out of circulation the year before.
What was his reaction?
He said he was perfectly aware of the risk. He did ask what the chances of a short-term killing were, and when I explained they were quite good, he told me to go ahead. Then he wrote out a cheque to his bank.
For what amount?
£20,000, covering both investments.
£20,000. Now, Mr. Ince, did the defendant at any time tell you that this Metallia investment was being made on behalf of the Knowles Trust?
I'm afraid not.
Will you tell us what happened then?
Metallia showed an initial gain, but then after a mere 3 weeks they were on the down very fast, 90 points in 6 days. At that stage, I sent a letter to the defendant, warning him that I didn't expect them to recover. There was never any answer.
My lord, could the witness be shown Exhibit A? Mr. Ince, do you recognize this letter?
That's it.
I wish to draw your attention to the words written on the foot of the page.
Yes?
Will you read them out to the court?
It's out of my hands now. God, what a mess.
It's out of my hands now. God, what a mess. Did you write that?
No, Fawkes did.
Mr. Ince, you are not competent to judge that.
It's unusual handwriting. I happen to recognize it, my lord.
That is quite immaterial.
My
I'm
lord,
sorry, my lord.
if I might be allowed.
Yes.
The defendant does not dispute that he wrote those words. Indeed, he intends to show that they were a just comment on a situation for which he was in no way responsible.